Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, baby metal fan, and the stars have aligned. Um, I've referred to Shakespeare before when I'm talking about baby metal and other Japanese music, but today something special happened. We got a new song, Mirror Mirror by Baby Metal, off the new album, The Other One, which people are receiving. Some of them have already got it. Mine should be arriving in the next day or so. But this song does something that Baby Metal have never done before. It quotes Shakespeare directly. So how could I not talk about it, right? I'm excited. My life suddenly has meaning. I've been training for this my whole life. All right, so let's give this a listen, and I'll break it up into small sections and talk about it as I go. Again, this is not going to be a reaction per se. It's going to be a conversation about what the song is about, or what the song seems to be about to me. There have been a couple of publications recently, which I'll probably refer to later on, where both Sue and Moa and separately Koba have been talking about baby metal generally and the current moment and what they're all about. And one of the things that emerges is something I've been saying for a long time, which is that the songs are written to be in some ways incomplete, and that they are completed by the interpretation of the audience. So there's a deliberate ambiguity built into the song structure. I'm going to focus particularly on the words and music, because that's where the meaning of the song finally inheres more than anything else. I'll also talk about the images in the visualizer. Again, it's not a conventional video we have here. It's sort of more images put to the music. And I think there's a danger of overreading those, but we will include that as part of what we're using to build a sense of what the song is. And we'll take it from there. Okay. Okay, so obviously we haven't got to any lyric yet, but this is one of the more progressive sounding licks that we've heard from baby metal in a while. You hear those time shifts, that sort of technical virtuosity of the guitar work. So it's a heavier sound than we've heard on the previous singles off this album, but it's also more self-consciously meta, right? That there's a jumping around, an alteration in the time patterning of the song that I think we haven't heard so far, which I'm glad to hear, because that's part of the sort of their trademark sound. As far as the visuals are concerned, we open with just lights in darkness, and then we start to see images of life at its most basic, right? We're moving from sort of single cell organisms and moving through into images of plants coming up and various other images of life and nature. So I think we're in the realm of the origins of the universe, the origins of certainly of the planet, right? That sort of movement from darkness into light, into life. I'm not entirely sure what to do with that in this sort of context of the whole song, but ultimately the song is about the opportunities of the new world, right? New world meaning the world that we are embarking on at any given moment, right? In a similar sense to the way that it's used in something like Brand New Day, right? Where the world is full of possibility and life and potentially good things going forward. Okay, so that sort of the djenty guitar sound and the sort of cutting back and forth and the abrupt time switches and such also correspond with shifts in the kaleidoscopic nature of the visuals, right? We start getting these fragmented mirror images of things that are sort of distorted, images that are split in two, images that are reflected in both directions. So there's and it's disorienting. And I think the sound of the music, those quick time shifts, are designed to wrong foot you. I talked about this in one of the other songs. There's a sort of inherent difficulty to it, which is designed to sort of throw you off a little bit, right? Because this is what the song's about. The song is about the difficulty of perceiving reality beyond what you think is real, what you want to be real, what you want to be real in the future, right? So the images that we're getting paired with these sort of shifting guitar sounds and shifting rhythms, I think are supposed to sort of create this sense of confusion. And then we get this series of images, which is really interesting, of us sort of passing through what looks like a very sort of stylized, abstract, almost like one of those long ballrooms in a palace, right? In a, whether it's Versailles or in a Japanese palace, where you have sort of those long tatami rooms separated by screens, doors, you know, so it gives you this sense of this sort of long repeating space. I think it also echoes the tori gates that you get, that we see in a video like Megitsune, right? That sense of passing from one realm, supernatural realm, into another, into another, into another. Those gates, that the big red gates, right? The horned gates that repeat, and it's supposed to separate a conventional reality from another. But they have that sense of framing a supernatural space. But in those long lines of multiple, we're in a kind of no man's land as we pass through them, and this sort of long repeating sense of a place where reality is hard to pinpoint, right? Because we're in a kind of hinterland.
Mirror, mirror, listen to my wish. Who's the fairest of them all? Mirror, mirror, make my wish come true. Who are you in the mirror?
So the lyrics in English say, mirror, mirror, listen to my wish. Who's the fairest of them all? Mirror, mirror, make my wish come true. Who are you in the mirror? So obviously this invokes the fairy story by the Brothers Grimm, which was turned into Snow White and Seven Dwarfs by Disney, and the images of the wicked queen who looks at herself in the magic mirror every day and asks who's the fairest of them all, and the mirror says, you are. And then one day the mirror says somebody else is, and the queen goes after her to kill her. So this is an image of looking at yourself, looking at your reflection, which is not exactly the same thing, right? But I think it also has a sort of darkness to it, and I think we can hear that darkness not just in the sort of the genty, bassy sounding guitars, but also in that haunting, vaguely Near Eastern tonality, right? Where it's playing with those minor sounds to create a sense of mystery and potentially menace, right? And so the lines of the song invoke that sense of mystery and menace, because of course, you know, the queen ultimately tries to kill Snow White, who she is told is more beautiful than she is. So make my wish come true. So that this, we're not just looking at ourselves, we're making a wish of some sort. And then the last question is, who are you in the mirror? So I don't think we're asking who the magic is. I think we're asking who the reflection is. So we're looking at ourselves, we're trying to figure out who we are. We're also trying to figure out what we want. And that means wrestling with a disjunction between the way we see ourselves internally and the way other people see us, right? Because that's what a mirror image is. I'm looking at myself in this video as I make it, and every time I turn one of these damn cameras on, I'm like, that's what I look like? Oh well. So yeah, there's this sense, I think, of trying to connect with yourself, but the only way that we can do that is by looking at oneself in the mirror, and that's another Shakespearean. The eye sees not itself, but by reflection, right? That's from Julius Caesar, in case anybody cares. Whoa, what? So, this is where things get complicated. So we move from one kind of fairy story, the Snow White, to another. The lines invoked are double, double, toil and trouble, which gets repeated, and the mirror. And then fire burn, cauldron, bubble, also repeated, mirror. In each case, the toil and the burn are clipped so short that they're almost inaudible, but that's the line. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron, bubble. And of course, these lines are from Shakespeare's Macbeth, possibly co-written by Thomas Middleton, circa 1606, 1605-6. What are they doing here? Okay, so I think the logic of the song is we move from one kind of mirror image, right, to another. We're looking into the cauldron, right, the reflection of the cauldron. But this is the cauldron of the three weird sisters in the play, or witches. People often call them witches. Then in the play calls them weird sisters. And weird is a word that combines a number of different things. It means strange, of course. It also means wayward, troublesome, outside the normal realm of life. And it means weird, W-Y-R-D, meaning having to do with fate or the future. The function of the witches in the play is to prophesy what is going to happen, depending on the way you read the play. They don't make anything happen. They merely present the possibility of what will happen, though they seem to have knowledge of the future which defies people's attempt to try to work around what they say is going to happen. They are, and this feels to me a really interesting image for BABYMETAL. Obviously the three, now of course currently we're looking at two members of BABYMETAL, but they have always sort of worked as a triad, and I assume we're going back to a triad in a couple of weeks. So this idea of the three witches as images of BABYMETAL themselves is kind of interesting, since, you know, they're often associated with sort of mysticism of one kind or another. But also, of course, this image comes from a play which is very much about ambition and about looking at yourself and asking whether you think you deserve better and trying to control the future. At this point of the play, this speech, though it's obviously, you know, famous, doesn't actually appear until the fourth act. So at this point, Macbeth has already killed Duncan, he's already killed Banquo, he's already become king. He goes back to the witches to try and secure his position, not really for himself, but for a kind of future lineage. So the witches create this sort of magic cauldron into which all these terrible ingredients go. And then out of the cauldron come these images of the future, images of things that Macbeth needs to be afraid of, images of the future line of kings and various other things. So what's the function in the song? Well, I think, you know, that first image of looking into the mirror and then asking who you are in that image is then being balanced with another image of saying, who do you want to be? And using the sort of mysticism to somehow control the future. Now, of course, the point in the play is that Macbeth can't control the future. And everything that the witches say to him turns out to be not true, or not precisely true. Not true in the sense that he understands it, right? They tell him he's immune, he can't be killed by anybody born of woman. He's immune until Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. Things that he thinks are impossible. And then, in a way, they both happen, right? Macduff is born by caesarean section, so he's not born of woman in a technical sense. And Malcolm's army cuts down the branches of the trees to cover their numbers so that they sort of effectively camouflage themselves. So there is a sense in which Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. The forest seems to move. It doesn't in real terms. So the witches use a kind of equivocation to trick Macbeth into thinking that he can nail down a future that he can't actually control. So this is at the heart of this moment in the song, right? That we're asking for a version of the truth about the future, but what we're going to be told cannot be trusted, right? That's the point about trying to divine the future, that what you get is always somehow unreliable.
鏡の中で生きる君は何を見ているリアルな自分なんて存在してないんだから
One of the things that I think we're seeing a lot on this album, and particularly in a song like this, is this sense of binary splits, right? And again, this is a mirror song in which things are balanced against each other, and as we saw in those images right at the beginning, it's not easy to tell what's real and what's the reflection, right? It's like going into a hall of mirrors. Think of that scene in The Man with the Golden Gun. That's a terrible analogy. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But that scene where Roger Moore's in the hall of mirrors and he sees himself reflected all over the place, and you can't tell which one is the real one until somebody shoots and breaks the mirror, right? So there's something similar going on here, and I think the musical switch here is again an attempt to create a sense of two separate things, right? There's a binary split, which is real, which is the illusion, and we switch to make that the sort of tonal switch, which you can hear really clear and distinct. We also move from English into Japanese. Kagami no naka de ikiru, kimi wa nani o miteiru. So what are you looking at while you are existing, living inside the mirror? Riaru na jibun nante sonzai shite nainda kara. You know that you don't exist as a true self. So it's asking what you see when you look at yourself, and you know that the image in the mirror isn't a real thing. So the thing that you're looking at is not a real thing. So this is really sort of existential, right? I think it works on multiple levels. And different people are going to interpret it in different ways. It reminds me of a Polka Dot Stingray song that I talked about, which is very much about sort of internet privacy and being out in public, right? And the way that the versions of yourself that get shown on social media, for example, are and are not you, and people start living their lives as if the internet version of themselves is somehow more real than the actual version of themselves, right? When people spend their lives taking and posting selfies to create the illusion of a life that they're not really living, and they're spending so much time trying to fabricate that illusion that their true self is being sort of lost, right? So yeah, what are you looking at when you're living inside the mirror, right? If you're inside the mirror, then you exist for other people. You exist to be seen by other people, which is not living for yourself. It's not living authentically, organically. It's living as a kind of performance. Now, of course, it's fascinating for a band like BABYMETAL, particularly at this point in their career, to be asking these questions, because, of course, BABYMETAL famously only appear in costume, in character. It's very hard to find pictures of Sue and Moa out of costume online. That's something that is very carefully policed. But I think it's interesting because it means that, in a sense, that their true selves are not in the mirror. The true selves are private, are being kept from us. So this version of themselves that is being offered is and is not who they really are. And they talk a lot about stepping into the role, right? One of the ideas that we've kicked around many times on this channel is the idea of BABYMETAL as a form of musical theatre, as a kind of pageantry in which these women take on the roles of their metal counterparts, and they perform that. But then there's also, I think, part of what we're hearing in a song like this is them looking at themselves and trying to figure out where their inner self stops and their outer self begins. And I am absolutely not saying this is a song about BABYMETAL. I get sort of tired of this reading where everybody wants to, it's a song about Yui, it's a song, I think in some ways that's not the point. The point is that these are songs that we're supposed to be able to make about ourselves. So while that kind of self-referential meta-theatrical element is kind of interesting, I think the point of the song is that this is being offered as a condition that we all live in. And it doesn't have to be about social media and online presence. It's about trying to separate our true selves from the selves that we play for the benefit, entertainment of others. Yeah.
幻想を超えて自分さえも飛び越えて新しい世界今ここに
I love that little guitar, a little bit of chorus on it, and the way that it matches the ripple in the image. But just going back lyrically, you don't exist as a real entity, a real person in the mirror. Genso o koite, jibun sae mo tobi koite, atarashi sekai ima koko ni. So beyond illusions, leaping, jumping even over yourself. Now, here in front of you is a new world, and in the visuals we see that sort of the fragmentation of the images, the reduction of sort of everything down to sort of data, and then we sort of reach the cosmos, right? Suddenly there's this image of a kind of infinite space, and I think the idea it's very Zen. It's very existential, but specifically in a kind of Buddhist existential sort of way, that part of what we're being asked to do here is deconstruct the self, at least the version of the self that you can see in the mirror, in order to escape all the crap that we impose on ourselves, right? Getting over yourself in every sense of that term, in order to see this sort of new world, which is beautiful and powerful and full of possibility and extraordinary if you can sort of shelve all your baggage and your ego and your sense of self and all your sort of small desires and jealousies and frustrations, many of which are about social interaction and the way others treat you and the way that you worry about the way others treat you and the way that you are constantly trying to stage yourself for other people, right? So I think this is the heart of the song. On the one hand, it's trying to discern who the true self is. And on the other side, it's sort of and flirting with a version of trying to control that and control your own future. And that's sort of the darker side. And then it sort of says, but if we can sort of get rid of that, get rid of that Macbethian ambition, that paranoia and need to control and anxiety about what everybody's thinking about you and all that sort of stuff, which is at the absolute heart of that play. If we can get away from all that, then there's all this other possibility out there where you shed yourself. It's very Buddhist, yeah, in order to tap into the infinite possibility of the universe. Okay, so as we come back into the instrumental and we leave behind that sort of serenity and we go back into the conflict, and all the images of nature that we're getting here are steadily more powerful, right? We begin with sort of eggs hatching and birds and shoots coming up and stuff like that, but then we move into more complex images of advanced nature, some of which are potentially at least dangerous and threatening, right? Images of power, images of appetite, right? Consumption. And then we start to slide into a more sort of a version of the world that becomes more complexly human and civilized, not necessarily in a good way. And again, you know, we get this sort of escalation and the disorienting after that serenity of that chorus. We get this the disorienting, anxious, anxiety-producing intensity of the music that balances all this stuff, that echoes it. Right, so now, you know, now we're going really dark. And you hear it, and you can see it in the visuals, right? That this is now it's a much more complicated world. It's full of images of things that are potentially dangerous or difficult. Again, power, but also a very sort of civilized, mechanized, human controlling power, which is not necessarily good, I think.
Mirror, mirror, listen to my wish. Who's the worst of them all?
Right, so now we're asking the mirror for something different. And again, you see that the images in the background are now starting to look like versions of mechanized, industrialized cities in a sort of stylized way. You see a lot of masts, whether they're tower blocks or chimneys or whatever. There's a sense of a lost innocence that we had at the beginning, and now this is the urban world as we experience it. And now we're asking the mirror for darker truths, not just who's the most beautiful, who's the fairest, but who's the worst. And that might be us, right? It might be ourselves in the mirror, and it might be others, and maybe asking the question, is that a necessary question? Is that the question itself problematic? Does it mean that we're trying to sort of put ourselves over others?
Mirror, mirror, make my wish come true. Who are you in the mirror?
So again, you know, make my wish come true. Who are you in the mirror? So we're looking at ourselves Am I the most beautiful? Am I the fairest? Or am I the worst? Yeah. This, and again, I'm coming back to things both that Sue said and that Koba said about this and other songs on this album. This sense of being kind of caught in a dilemma of trying to figure out something difficult, I think, is at the heart of the album. I'm not yet convinced that I would call this a true concept album in the terms that I talked about it when I had Jim Fusilli on, but certainly there's a kind of thematic darkness and sense of struggle, which seems to be present in all the songs so far, and trying to sort of work out and define oneself in a difficult situation. I think that presents a kind of through line that we're seeing here as well. And there's the Macbeth lines again. So again, the desire to in this part of the song, I think that this is the desire to somehow control the future, right? It's embracing the mirror image, embracing the way that people see us, and trying to control the future so that we solidify ourselves, our legacy, in that very human world, which then gets punctured by the next part. Kagami no naka de ikiru, boku ga sasayaki kakeru. So I'm whispering to you, again, while being inside the mirror. Whatever is inside the mirror, I'm whispering to you. Uriaru na jibun nante sonzai shite nain dakara. Again, same phrase as before. You know you don't exist as a true self. And then the last part. Beautiful. And notice, incidentally, the way that the bird in the image goes from black to white and vice versa, right? Again, that sense of a mirror image, but the kind of dividing line between the two, where both things coexist simultaneously, even though they are in some ways polar opposites. So again, we're sort of riding this moment of decision, a moment of choice, and paradox, trying to sort of find the way forward. Genso o koete, jibun sae mo tobi koete, atarashi sekai ima koko ni. So again, beyond illusions, leaping even over your very self, ima, now, in order to access the new world that is in front of you. So it's only by escaping yourself, all these anxieties, all these... It reminds me a little bit of Yaba, right? That sense of being in a conflicted position where you're trying to do this and trying to do that and trying to make decisions of one kind or another. And somehow you have to escape these kind of pressures because it's making you crazy. And I think there's something similar here. That this is darker, right? Because the kind of ambition and self-destructiveness, which is implied by the Macbeth, right? Macbeth is ultimately a completely self-destructive personality. Nothing is ever enough. He wants the crown, he gets the crown. Now he's got to start killing other people to make sure he keeps the crown, though there's no clear threat to him at any point in the play. you know? He creates the threat by behaving like a monster in trying to sort of stay one step ahead of, you know, the inevitable, and in believing that he can somehow control the future, which is why he keeps going back to the witches, and they can say, you know, if you do this, then this will be okay, and he misreads everything, right? That's the other thing that is central to Macbeth, the misreading of what he's being told. And I think this is what mirrors do, right? That you look at yourself and you assess yourself according to the image that you see, and it's wrong, right? It's not actually the way other people see you necessarily, and the way other people see you may not be important. And I think that's that key line, right, about somehow getting over yourself, getting past yourself, shedding yourself, especially in that sort of public dimension, the social version of who you are, the public version of who you are. If you can get away from that, then maybe there's some kind of real potential, real joy, real fulfillment that doesn't depend on other people. I've been thinking a lot about this recently as I sort of, you know, at the point of ending my career as a professor and looking ahead to other possibilities and other ways of measuring success. I'll talk more about this another time, but I think finding the things that matter, regardless of what the world values, that I think is essential. And I think that's what this is about. It's about both trying to figure out who you are and what you want, but also recognizing that both of those things, who you are and what you want, is conditioned by the kind of social pressures that the world puts on you. And what you really need to do is somehow shed all of that, get rid of that, and figure out who you are and what you want outside those contexts, which is a really, really hard thing to do. And of course, that's enlightenment, right? That's nirvana. Yeah. Great song, man. Great song. I really like, man, everything about this album so far has been just great. I heard the leaked tracks the other day, and I don't think there's a weak song on the album. I'll listen to it in more detail as I get my own copy of the CD, but yeah, anyway. Mirror, Mirror. I love the duality of it musically. I love that sense of the core sense of conflict and conflicted feeling. I think that's absolutely, you can feel it, and it's there in the lyric, I think. So yeah, I mean, what precisely the song means to you, obviously, you know, is up to you to figure out. And I think the song is deliberately constructed that way. There's enough room to wiggle that you can shape it to your own circumstances. But for me, that's what it's about. It's about confronting yourself, trying to figure out what your essential self truly is, and shedding all the expectations, all the things that the world projects onto you, the things that it thinks you should want, money or fame or whatever, you know, and getting away from all that in order to somehow connect at that sort of more essential level, at the level of the universe's own energy, which sounds very touchy-feely, but I do think that on some existential level, that's what it's about. It's about embracing the universe. Something Macbeth was not able to do, which is why he died. All right. That's it, I guess. I will do a rough edit. My editor is very busy at the moment, so I'm going to have to just cobble this together myself. So I apologize if the production values are rubbish. This is not my strong suit. Okay, that's all. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe. I have new information coming about an upcoming book which I think that baby metal fans will be really into. It's not a book about baby metal, it's a novel, but it has some real sort of thematic connections to Japanese folk culture and mythology, and I'll be talking about that soon when I do a cover reveal and things like that. Check out my Patreon page, check out my merchandise. I have new shirts and mugs and things, including my new favorite, the Bokurawa t-shirt, which I really like the image of, which I took from the Monochrome song, among others. All right, that's it. Thanks. Talk to you soon. Bye.